Bienvenue to Bonjour Paris Live. Our online event series, free for Bonjour Paris members, offers expert lectures, discovery talks, and conversations about la vie française. In between your trips to France, we're here to inspire you. Bonjour Paris has been online since 1995, almost as old as the internet itself. Our website is packed with interesting articles about the culture and history of Paris. And now, thanks to the support of our growing membership base, we're able to showcase new offerings like video and online talks. For details about all the benefits of Bonjour Paris membership, visit our membership page on our website. Enjoy today's presentation and à bientôt!
Bonjour à tous, and welcome to Even More Secrets of Mastering French from the experts at the Alliance Française. My name is Bryn Voller, and I'm the past president of the Alliance Française of Minneapolis-St. Paul. I'm also a member of the board of directors of the Fédération des Alliances Françaises, USA. I know that if you've tuned in today, it's because you want to learn to speak, hear, read, and write French better, more like a native speaker. And we've got three expert teachers from the Alliance Française network who are going to share some great tips and some great resources with you that you will be able to use immediately to take your French to the next level. We've got something for everyone today at all levels of French learning. Before I introduce our three expert teachers, let me just say a couple of words about the Alliance Française. The Alliance Française was founded in Paris 140 years ago this year to promote French language and French-speaking cultures all around the world. Today, the Alliance Française is the largest cultural network in the world. The Fédération des Alliances Françaises USA is the national level Alliance Française organization in the United States. It represents the 100 plus US chapters and provides them with educational and cultural resources like today's program. Melissa Sora, the Federation's National Program Manager, is providing technical support and will be monitoring questions for today's program. Alliance Française chapters across the United States offer language classes for all ages, at all levels, from beginner to advanced to literature and cultural offerings. Native fluent instructors, small intimate classes, immersive teaching, those are the hallmarks of Alliance Française teaching, and it's done in the context of a wonderful community at which students also attend social, cultural events. They speak French with other motivated students and with native speakers. It's active learning, speaking, reading, listening, and writing in real time with real people. Now, let me introduce our expert French teachers. First, from the Midwest, Dr. Séverine Bates. Séverine is a native of Martinique, the French-speaking island in the Caribbean. She currently teaches at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota, as well as the Alliance Française, Minneapolis-St. Paul. From the West Coast, Pauline Chateau is the admissions coordinator of the Alliance Française Seattle, where she also teaches children and adult classes at all levels. And finally, from the Eastern United States, Rachel Villéger. Rachel is the former executive director of the Alliance Française in Westchester, New York. She has been teaching French to students of all ages at all levels for more than 20 years. Rachel, tell us a little bit about today's agenda.
Yeah, bonjour, Bryn. Bonjour, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about grammar and usage tips, and for common questions from English speakers and difficulties to learn grammar. We're going to be talking about helpful mnemonics and rules of thumbs, as well as pronunciation tips. And we will see, difficulties for pronunciation for English speakers in particular, and seeing how literature, poetry, and music can help with memorizing the correct pronunciation in French.
That sounds great. So let's jump right in with grammar and usage. And Séverine, A grammar and usage quirk for English speakers learning French on day one is that there are so many just basic day one phrases in which the English language uses to be and the French language uses avoir, to have. Very confusing.
Exactly. And I would say, avoir ou être, to have or to be, that is the question, my dear Breen.
Yes.
And yes, this is one of the biggest hurdles that learners encounter as they're learning, French. These are fixed expression or idiomatic expression. And to be honest, there is no real secret. And the only thing that you have to do is memorize them. Try to avoid, word for word in translations. And I would say, however, there is one tip. One thing you could think about is, if you really want to use to be or être, right? As I am hungry or I am thirsty. I would suggest to use an adjective such as affamé or assoiffé. So j'ai faim would I am hungry would be je suis affamé, or I am thirsty would be je suis assoiffé. Just remember that, usually être is followed by an adjective and avoir by a noun. So as in, j'ai faim, right? Faim is a noun and affamé is an adjective which derives from faim. So here's a little tip, that you can, keep with you today.
I think the real tip is not to try to translate mot à mot, word for word. You have to learn these and use them as a unit. That's a great point. Pauline, another first-year French essential is the past tense of verbs. We learn the passé composé and we learn the imparfait. Remind me, when do we use passé composé? When do we use imparfait?
Yes, this can be a little challenging for English speakers since there's not really an equivalent in English, but the passé composé is used for a moment in the past or sequential events that are over and done. So for example, if I say, j'ai fini mes devoirs avant de me coucher hier soir. I finished my homework before I went to bed last night. I know when I finished it. I know when it started, when it ended. I know it's over, it's done. However, the imparfait is used for repetitive actions over time in the past, condition over time in the past. So for example, if I say in French, chaque soir, je finissais mes devoirs avant de me coucher. Every night, every evening, I finished my homework before I went to bed. So this is something that I did regularly. It's a repetitive action. A common mistake is to think that passé composé is for a quick and short action and imparfait for a long action. It doesn't matter how long the action is. What's important is the nature of the action. Is it an event, or is it more the description of the action? Is it more like the circumstances of the action?
And Séverine, there is poetry to the passé composé, and I think even our beginners, if they look at this wonderful Prévert poem, it will help them work if they read it aloud. Tell us about it.
For instance, il a mis le café dans la tasse. Il a mis le lait dans la tasse de café. Il a mis le sucre dans le café au lait. So this is a beautiful, beautiful poem. It's a classic among French teachers, and especially when they want to teach in the passé composé with avoir or with or revise or review irregular past participles. It is very easy for learners to understand. And at the end, you can also create a skit. So I would suggest, learning this poem, listening to it, enacting it. And you can also find a short video on YouTube, actually.
And yes. I can, if you go out and Google Déjeuner du matin, Prévert, out there, you will find it. You will also see that it has a surprising ending to it. This is just the first half of it. But Rachel, even the greatest writers in the French language don't always follow the passé composé imparfait rule that Pauline just gave it. And in fact, one of the most famous examples is the very first sentence of Marcel Proust's À la recherche du temps perdu.
Yeah, this one is an interesting one because as Pauline was saying, though, it is about an action that's finished and that's done. So, longtemps, je me suis couché de bonne heure. This implies that it's not the case anymore and that he probably has insomnia problems these days. And then Parfois, à peine ma bougie éteinte, mes yeux se fermaient si vite que je n'avais pas le temps de me dire « je m'endors ». It's a great way to immerse you in the novel and we know straight away that it's about lost times and about the past and about remembering things from the past. So it's a great way to start the novel, I think.
There's certainly a fluidity, and he's suggesting there in his view of the past and time. And longtemps je me suis, over a long time, I went to bed early. That I think that's going to stop a lot of native French speakers, and they're going to say, whoa, what's going on here? And perhaps that is what Proust was trying to do in that very first sentence. Rachel, while I have you, let's go back to French 101, day one, verb tenses. Let's turn to the future. We learn the futur proche, and we learn the futur simple. Explain the difference in when you use them.
Yes, so futur proche is actually one that's very convenient for English speakers and very easy because it works like going to. Aller plus infinitif is the same logic as in English. So when you say je vais finir mes devoirs, it's like I'm going to finish my homework. So aller plus infinitive is really the natural one. It's one that we use all the time when we talk about something that's going to happen soon, or when it's about, in spoken French, we use futur proche a lot more. Futur simple, you will see more in writing, or when it's about something that's more distant in the future, or when it's about, something where there's a prediction where it's not quite sure for yet, at this stage, like weather forecast, for example. We know it says it will rain, il pleuvra, or it will be sunny, il fera beau, but there's some uncertainty there. And you know what, for future, I think one thing that's very important to remember is that you can actually also use the present tense. Just use tomorrow or next week plus present tense. Demain, je vais à la piscine. That's not incorrect in French, and that's just easier. Right. You don't have to memorize all the tenses. Just use, the adverbs and, the things that help you define the time. Even next month, you can say present tense if it's constructed like that, it's fine.
That implies a certain certainty that is going to happen. That is what I'm going to do. Yeah, Pauline, we looked at the poetry of the passé composé with Jacques Prévert. There's a poetry in the futur simple aussi. In fact, it's one of the most famous poems in French literature by Victor Hugo, Demain de l'Aube.
Yeah, beautiful poem that I recommend not only to study futur simple, it's just beautiful. He wrote it after his daughter and son-in-law accidentally passed away. So he's writing the poem to his deceased daughter. And I know how much Séverine loved that poem. So I don't know if you'd like to read a few lines for us, Séverine?
Yes, I really love it. Thanks. So, demain dès l'aube, à l'heure où blanchit la campagne, je partirai. Vois-tu, je sais que tu m'attends. J'irai par la forêt, j'irai par la montagne. Je ne puis demeurer loin de toi plus longtemps.
Thank you. Yeah, so tomorrow at dawn, when the countryside widens, I will leave. You see, I know that you are waiting for me. I will go through the forest. I will go by the mountains. I cannot stay away from you any longer. So here he's using futur simple. Je partirai, j'irai. And like Rachel said, there are different reasons to use futur simple. For me here, there's a sense of uncertainty, a sense of an more abstract future, maybe.
I also think that partirai, j'irai, it's more poetic. It's a little grander, perhaps, than the futur proche, which can be a little pedestrian. That's day-to-day speak. I don't know.
For probably the musicality also is the reason why he used it. And I like it also because if you read it, if you look at it, it helps to remember how to spell the ending when you conjugate futur simple with je, because it sounds very similar to the conditional. If I say je partirai, I would leave, or je partirai, I will live, with no other context, you don't know if I'm using conditional or future. Here we do know because he's saying tomorrow, but still, it's good to just practice how to conjugate and spell the futur simple.
And Demain de l'Aube is widely available on the internet. This is just the first part of the poem. I invite you all to go out there and read it. Read it aloud. That is such a great practice. Pauline, while I have you here, let's move to mnemonics and rules of thumb. one of the almost overwhelming problems that English speakers face from the very beginning when they are learning French is this problem that in French, nouns are either masculine or they're feminine. We don't have that in English. That's overwhelming. How do I remember which nouns are le, which are la, which are un, which are une?
Yeah, there is a very general rule for that, is that if a noun ends with a E, is more likely to be feminine than masculine, or if it ends with ION, is very likely to be feminine. Of course, there are some exceptions, for example, for the nouns ending in age, isme, but I mean, there are exceptions, but it's not random exception. You can still put them in categories, you can memorize them. So I think Rachel will have some examples of how to memorize.
Yeah,
exceptions.
that's kind of a gross rule of thumb, because I can just think of or ver. There are many exceptions,
Yes.
many exceptions, but it's not like there aren't some other helpful mnemonics. And Rachel, there are some endings to nouns that really signal, in most cases, the gender.
Exactly. Like Pauline was saying, they're not random. Most of the time, they're not random. Like age, isme, all these ones, they're just suffixes that, you know, we have prefix and suffixes both in French and English. And a lot of the words, you know, that have these suffixes, they will follow this rule. And usually there will be also transparent words that exist in English or similar. So that will be easier to remember those. And the common feminine endings, you know, you will have war, sion, ur, et. All these ones, they're very common. You do have a few exceptions like comité and squelette, but usually there are reasons based on the root of the word, some historical reasons. And, you know, if it's just a few exceptions and it's words that you never use or very rarely use, it's not a big problem, I think.
But these are actually quite helpful. And I suggest that our listeners don't try to memorize, you know, all 15 in each category here, but try to remember a couple, 2 or 3, add a little bit more as you go on. And I think these are some helpful, very helpful indicators. Okay, that's helpful. And I know Rachel's going to talk about this later in the context of a beautiful poem that she's going to introduce to us. But let's, Pauline, let's switch to prononciation. And again, I'm just focusing on day 1 French literature here and French pronunciation. You know, on the first day of learning French, I learned the word for girl is fille, F-I-L-L-E. And the word for town or city is ville, fille. They look almost exactly the same, but they're pronounced differently. What's the rule for pronouncing I-L-L in French words?
Yeah, so the main rule is to pronounce it I, like in fille, in the example that you just gave. This is not necessarily difficult to pronounce, just maybe not very intuitive, because you see a L, so you want to do a L with your tongue, but it's actually I. So you can think of the Y in English in the word yes, and then you add a E sound before it, and it's a little bit of that. You have the I, like in famille, fille, coquillage, vanille. So that's the main rule, but of course there are some exceptions to it.
And then there's ILs. It's sort of the same issue. I, by, orteil, œil, fenouil. Those are also that same y sound that you mentioned here. But like you said, there's some important exceptions that come up on day 1.
Yes, and like we said earlier, even if there are many exceptions, you can put them in categories, and you know, it's not random exception. You can memorize them. So you have exception when you have ILL or IL in ville, tranquille, mille, lille, distillé, or at the end of a word when you have IL in chenille, fil, ville. So these examples, they don't follow the rule that we just explained.
Have you got a helpful way to remember some of those major exceptions?
Yeah, exactly. So like you said earlier, you don't have to try to memorize every single exceptions, but the one that you might want to use more often, and you can put them in sentences like this one here. Il y a mille villes tranquilles comme l'île. In that very simple short sentence, you have the 4 exceptions to the rule.
And those are really the most common exceptions to the rule as well.
Absolutely.
So that's a very helpful sentence that everybody should learn. I think that's great. Séverine, a great way to work on pronunciation
Yes.
is by learning French tongue twisters. The French call it virlangue.
Yes, exactly. These are like one of my favorite things to do in class, especially at the beginning of class as an icebreaker, because students love them. It's very challenging. And talking about challenges, I have one for my colleagues here. But definitely there are great ways to practice your pronunciation, your fluency, but also your accent. And you can also if you want to practice more, you can go to TV5 Monde. They have great resources there. Have a list of popular, very common like tongue twisters, and then you can just practice at home. And like I said, I had a challenge, Pauline and Rachel, because we have actually be good examples, good models, right? And so how would you pronounce the first one? So I would start, okay? So I would say, ces sons se succèdent sans souci. Can you go faster than me? Pauline.
The same sentence?
Yes,
Yeah.
faster than me.
Ces sons se succèdent sans souci.
All right.
Eh
Okay.
bien.
So, Rachel, what about you?
Ces sons se succèdent sans souci.
All right, good job, good job. So again, it's a great way to practice, like your fluency. If you are a stage actress, this is a great exercise. So go for it. That's what I would say.
Okay. Virlangue, TV5 Monde, they have a great collection. Rachel, another pronunciation challenge for English speakers sometimes is what you called earlier the transparent words, or mots transparents. What do you mean by mots transparents? Transparent words.
So the transparent words, les mots transparents, is words which have the same meaning in French and English, and they are usually spelled nearly the same way or the same way, but their pronunciation is different because they follow the English rules or the French rules. And this is in fact something difficult for French speakers learning English.
Yeah.
People always know that French accent is very strong when we speak English. This is why. It's because the rules are different. But see, if I take that word pronunciation, in French we say prononciation, because in English you have this up down pattern when you talk, but in French the words are flat, either ascending or descending. So for example, something like moment in English, and also you pronounce the T in English, but in French, moment, mouvement or movement, and development. See how the pattern is completely different?
Yeah,
And,
I think sometimes English speakers see that word, it looks the same, it probably means the same, and they just kind of forget to speak à la Française, huh?
Yes, and that's the number one problem, I think, for beginners. They go to France and they will, their brain will just tell them, okay, I pronounce that the way it's in English. And this is the reason why people don't understand, because of pronunciation. And so it can be very frustrating, but you just have to learn and practice those ones. And so, obviously you have to make it more fun for practicing those. And that's why, again, I think literature and poetry can help a lot, making it more entertaining, because just memorizing a full list of words is not going to be fun. But something like, introduction, mémorisation, these words are a bit difficult. If you pronounce them in a sentence, it will be easier. And start also with the shorter ones, 2 syllables, like action, nation, passion. Obviously, that's going to be a lot easier than if you take words that are like 4 or 5 syllables long.
All right, that's fantastic. Séverine just mentioned the library of tongue twisters, or virlangue, on TV5 Monde. I wanted to just remind folks of 2 other fabulous resources, just a word, fabulous resources for French students. One is Culture-Tech. We mentioned that back in February when we did the first half of this show. They've got books that have been translated into Français facile. Even beginners can read them. They've got comic strips that are in both languages, just all sorts of wonderful resources. Culture-Tech is something available to people who have joined the Alliance Française. And Pauline, the other resource we mentioned last February was French radio, especially Radio France Internationale and the Journal en Français Facile.
Yeah, this is a wonderful resource I recommend to all my students from RFI, Radio France Internationale, specifically Journal en Français Facile, so it's real news. Français Facile, so it's easy French. It means that it's slightly simplified, but not too much. It's not baby French, it's still the real news. It's very authentic. And it's available for free every day, Monday through Friday. So you can listen to it every day for your regular practice of French. And once a week, they also provide you with exercises, quizzes, so you can challenge your comprehension of the news, focus a little bit more on the vocabulary. You have the transcription as well, so you can listen and follow along. And actually, these days, many Alliance Française are developing curriculum and classes around that resource. So you can use it, for self-study, your everyday practice, but you can also join a class and actually have a conversation in French about the topic and have a deeper analysis of the news.
Just Google RFI and you'll find it out there. You can listen in real time, or as Pauline said, you can visit the recordings that are posted or the transcriptions. Fabulous resource. Okay, Rachel, we've been talking about music, and you said that many times. I've heard you say that French songs, one of the best ways to learn French is to listen to French songs.
Yes, for sure, because the way our brain works, when something is associated with music, it's a different part of our brain that will memorize it. And I'm sure all of you still remember some of the nursery rhymes you learned when you were 3 years old. Yep. Whereas, I don't always remember things that I did last week, or something that, someone talked to me 2 days ago, I might not remember it. So it's just something that helps your brain and tricks your brain into remembering things more easily.
And the slide says we can go all the way from arias from French opéra, all the way to la chanson populaire, and to rap even. And you've got a great example of going from opera to rap.
Yes, exactly. And so I don't know if you're familiar with Carmen. Carmen is a short story from Prosper Mérimée. And of course, it was adapted as the opera by Georges Bizet, which is very famous, with L'amour est un oiseau rebelle, blah, blah, blah. I'm not very good at singing, so I'm not going to do it. But this one, I think, is great because a lot of my students, they have problems with reflexive verbs or pronouns in general. And so here, when you have si tu ne m'aimes pas, je t'aime, si je t'aime, etc. And so this one is a great way for remembering it. And also something like prends garde à toi. Again, prendre is a verb we use all the time. So for the memorization, that's great. And aime, obviously, is a verb we use all the time. So both to remember the pronunciation and the spelling, it's very useful to learn this song.
And what's very fun is that the Belgian rapper Stromae has created his own Carmen using exactly some of the same language, right?
Yes, this is a great song from Stromae, and this one has a slight twist because it's about Twitter and narcissism on Twitter. So instead of si je t'aime is like si je m'aime, and so it changes the pronouns. But it's a very fun one, and if you watch the video of the clip, it's got subtitles as well, so it's very easy to learn. And so this one is great as well because, imperative tense can be tricky to learn, but this kind of song with prends garde à toi, garde à vous, garde à eux, you can learn pronouns, you can learn tenses. It's, songs have very useful for that.
And Pauline, you have a couple of great examples of songs that help your students remember some grammar and usage tips. If I want to say someone nice or something good, I may just go mot à mot and do it wrong in French because I forget something important.
Exactly. So when a student do that, I always send them that song, Juste quelqu'un de bien by Enzo. So it means simply somebody nice. The song is about not wanting to be a celebrity or somebody important and famous, just to be a good person. And so that's the title of the song, but that's also the chorus. So she repeats it many times in the song, and she says, Juste quelqu'un de bien. And so it helps to memorize that in French, we need the preposition de between quelqu'un and then the following adjective, bien, ou gentil, ou difficile, ou hargneux. Same thing for something, quelque chose. We don't say quelque chose beau, we say quelque chose de beau, de facile, de bien, de mal. And also you will notice that the following adjective, so bien, gentil, difficile, is always as the masculine form. Even if you're talking about a woman or something that is a feminine word in French, it will always be masculine.
Okay, and then what about if I had a hammer?
Yeah, si j'avais un marteau, that's the French version. That's a cover by Claude François or Clo-Clo, who was very, very famous in France. So that's pretty much the same lyrics in French. It goes, si j'avais un marteau, if I had a hammer, je cognerais le jour, je cognerais la nuit, j'y mettrais tout mon cœur, je bâtirais une ferme, une grange et une barrière, etc. And this is a good one to remember the grammar rule of si followed by imparfait and then conditional. So if in English, if I had, it's a subjunctive and then a conditional. In French, it's si followed by imparfait and then conditional. A common mistake is to use the conditional right away after si. Si j'aurais un marteau, even in English, it's not correct. If I would have a hammer, no, it's if I had. So yeah, it's a fun song and it exists in English too, so it's easy to remember and to kind of absorb that structure.
That's a great one to listen to Claude François singing that song. And Rachel, put it all together with just, I think, a beautiful piece of slam poetry that's set to music by Grand Corps Malade. That's his name.
Yes, Grand Corps Malade. So as we were talking about earlier, you have some suffixes that are either masculine or feminine, and learning them, this song is one of the great examples because you have a lot of them. And so, for example, à votre jante que j'admire, qui crée en chaque homme un orage, au cinéma ou dans la vie, vous êtes les plus beaux personnages. This song has a lot of these age, yon ending that we were talking about earlier. So it's a great one. And also, again, it's got the imperative, and veuillez is something we use all the time in French. Very common to hear that. And it's one that's a bit difficult to pronounce. So it's a great way to practice it, like veuillez accepter. And then, so we were talking about earlier, ism, isme, machisme, coutume, culture. So isme is masculine and are feminine. So, and we were talking about et as well. And depuis belle lurette, that's another thing that's great with songs, is that you can learn idiomatic expressions and make them easier to remember, because
and
we know.
Depuis belle lurette, ça veut dire quoi? Guess what does that mean?
Depuis belle lurette, it's like from a long time, or it started a long time ago.
Forever. Well, folks, we are running out of time here. I want to talk about next steps here. Next steps, we've got a QR code. We would love to have you come and visit the Federation homepage. Using this QR code, we've summarized some of the helpful tips and resources that our expert teachers have provided today on that page. Go take a look, and while you're there, identify on our map the nearest Alliance Française and contact them about free placement tests and sign up for a free newsletter. And then I hope that you'll come and join us at the Alliance Française. I also hope that you will come and join us for the next great offering from our dear friends at Bonjour Paris, which will be Sunday, April 30th at 12:30 Eastern Time in the United States. It's called City of Love, Is Paris Still the Capital of Romance? I can't wait. And with that, I would like to thank our three French experts, Séverine, Rachel, and Pauline. I would also like to thank Melissa and our dear friends at Bonjour Paris. And before I say goodbye to you, Melissa, is there a question or two that we could perhaps have our experts answer?
Yes, Bryn, we do have one question from William about the future tense, the future push. William would like to know, when you're talking about, events that are going to happen soon, how soon is soon?
It can be just in 5 minutes, or even just after this. For example, je vais déjeuner, I'm going to have lunch. It can be just after this video.
Okay.
Thank
Is that
you.
it?
Thank you, Rachel. That's it.
Very good. So I would like to say to all of you in attendance today, and to all of you who may listen to this in the future on the internet, merci de votre intérêt, merci de votre présence, et à la prochaine. Au revoir.